Good afternoon and welcome to the end of our third week for the UNIV 391 COVID-19, the Mason Impact course. We are thrilled to see you here today. It is finally, it looks like a beautiful day. We're not going to have thunderstorms interrupt us during the actual talk. And I know, and I hope that's true, because I've been worried about losing power in the midst of this, and that's one of those worries of the working remotely part. A few just basic announcements. A reminder that today is the last of the 3 presentations for the week. And so we've been asking you to do your prompts within 24 hours, but a reminder that that your cutoff time is Friday at midnight, and knowing the TAs, they start grading just then. So you need to make sure that you have completed your responses to all 3 prompts by Friday at midnight. A couple other reminders. One is a reminder that when we're using the chat buttons down at the bottom, the chat is specifically for course-related mechanics, and the Q&A is for questions that have to do with the presentation. Last time I fussed at y'all a little bit and said, to be careful about all the chatter in the chat box during the presentations, and then you stopped asking questions for a while in the middle of the Q&A too. We encourage all the questions in the Q&A. We want you to be paying attention and asking questions in there. Don't save them all to the end, because they're really hard to catch up. So as you're hearing things that you have questions about or from the reading, make sure you're going ahead and posting them in there, because and not only that, I'm loving seeing your questions. You're really thinking about this, and I love seeing you respond to each other's questions too and voting them up. So continue. That activity is really interesting, and we're thrilled to be able to see it. The only other announcement I was going to say is continue to listen to what the speakers are saying about how you can get involved. Mason is a big research university, but it's also one that's well known for its ability for students to get directly involved in all the things that we're talking about. And one of the reasons we're holding this whole class is so you have direct access and get to hear directly from some of our top faculty and staff about what we're doing and how we're responding to COVID-19. And one of the fun things today about having Dean Davis as a part of our talk is that Rick and I have been working together for 10 years on getting students directly involved in the research and scholarly activities and the creative arts at Mason. And so it's fun to have him here in this capacity talking about this, because it means so much to both of us that y'all have an opportunity to get involved. And every faculty member who's been a part of this so far has really been impressed by both the quality of the questions you're asking and are here because they're interested in being able to work with students. So I just wanted to plug that again. Reminder that you can look at masonimpact.gmu.edu, or you can contact as each of the faculty members and staff members who've been talking. You can also talk to them directly about opportunities. So with that, today I want to introduce you to 2 of our staff and faculty who are involved in the creative arts. One of the things that we know that's happened as part of the COVID-19 crisis is the idea that people coming together to do things in a small room or a big room has been disrupted. And that's one of the things that's so important about the arts, is bringing people together for shared experiences. And so our arts program, which is well known nationally and internationally, has had to pivot to think about how we're offering the arts to people in this new environment. And so I'm really excited to have our 2 speakers today. Rick Davis, as I talked about before, he is our Dean of our College of Visual and Performing Arts. He's also the Executive Director of our Hylton Performing Arts Center. And the other fun thing is Rick held my job more than 10 years ago, I think. And so I am indebted to Rick for laying great foundation for being able to work with undergraduate students at Mason. We also have Adrienne Godwin today. She's the Director of Programming for the College of Visual and Performing Arts, and has been really instrumental in getting our arts online during this time, and is really also an advocate for students being involved in the arts. So I am thrilled to have them both and looking forward to learning from them today. So with that, Adrienne and Rick, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Usher. Bethany, it's always a pleasure to work with you. Yes, I was an associate provost like you, although when I was doing that job, it was a lot less interesting than it is now. And that's partly due to your good work with the Mason Oscar and the Students as Scholars program, which I don't know if you've bragged about this to this group yet, but they should know that under your leadership and that of Kim Eby and others, our Students as Scholars undergraduate research program won a very prestigious national award a few years ago, and it continues to be a national model for this endeavor. So, hurrah! And it's great to be here, and thanks for thinking up this course. Adrienne and I are going to deliver today what we like to think of as a 3-act play on the subject of COVID and the Mason response, the overall theme of this course. And the 3 acts, each of which of course is appropriately short so that we can get it all done in the time allotted, and then have time for your questions, which I agree with Bethany, they should be peppered all the way through so they can be fresh when you ask them. Not that we'll necessarily deal with them until later, but absolutely respond in the moment. But the 3 acts each have their own title. Act 1 is exposition, as introductory scenes of films and plays usually are, and that'll be me. I'll be giving you a little bit of a sense of the arts sector and its impact on American life and business and economy, and sort of lay out the scenario of what was lost when Act 2 happened. Act 2 we call the catastrophe, and that's the onset of the pandemic, and which was not a light switch, it was more of a dimmer switch. It was off in the distance, kind of glowing, and then all of a sudden people began to have to take it very seriously. And then, and there's a couple of different scenes in Act 2. And then Act 3, we finally deliver on the promise of the title of today's section, which is imagining a new future for the performing arts. And we will alternate more or less as we go through the 3 acts. Also, we'll be live chatting a couple of links and things as we go. Some of it planned, some of it probably improvised as we go through. I'll just say 1 or 2 things by way of introduction, self-introduction, beyond what Bethany kindly provided. And that is that my home discipline in the arts is that of the theater. I'm a director and a dramaturg and a writer and a very bad actor, so I don't practice that professionally. I'm an enthusiastic actor, but a bad one. I also work in the musical side of life as a director of opera and musical theater. Opera is my secret passion, and trained as a vocalist in a younger life, not again to be a professional singer, but to be able to understand what professional singers have to do when they perform on the operatic stage, which is something of a combination of art and athletics, because it's a very physical feat to be an opera singer. Adrienne is from the dance world. I'll let her to talk about her own career here in a second, but it's kind of similar in the sense that dancers are athletes as well as artists. So some of the references I'll be making throughout today will have a theatrical flavor, but in the College of Visual and Performing Arts, we're lucky enough to teach 7 different disciplines, each of which has sub-disciplines. So the college provides degree program training in the visual arts, in dance, in music, in theater, in film and video, in computer game design, and in arts management. And we also operate 2 very large, very active performing arts centers, the Center for the Arts on the Fairfax campus and the Hylton Performing Arts Center on the Science and Technology campus in Manassas. And we have operations on all of Mason's campuses, Arlington, Fairfax, SciTech, and Mason Korea. So we have classes there. We don't perform there yet, but we're getting to that. So Adrienne, would you mind just saying a word or 2 about yourself, and then we'll go into Act 1. So that was the prologue.
Sure. What Rick didn't tell you is that he's also a very accomplished kazoo player and also the recorder. So, I don't
see any in the office. You're all very lucky today.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in. I know many of you are new to Mason, and I'm thrilled to be able to interact with you. And for those of you that have been at Mason for a little bit, it's nice to be able to engage with you in this way. As Rick said, my background is in dance. I've kind of spent equal parts of my career working for the presenter. So that's what we are. We are a university arts presenter. So we bring in artists and present them to the community. And then I've also worked for 2 dance companies in management roles, and have been on tour around the world and involved in the creation of many productions. I've been at Mason. I just had my 2-year anniversary here. And when I got here, I never could have imagined that we would have been through what we've been through. But so my role as director of programming is really curating the professional performing arts series that take place at both of our venues. As Rick mentioned, the Center for the Arts in Fairfax and the Hylton Performing Arts Center in Manassas. Now, a lot of things go on at both of these venues. They're used by student groups, by community groups, but my purview is really over the artists that are based across the United States and across the world, and choosing a combination of artists to bring in and present to our communities. And by the way, if you don't know this yet, as a Mason student, you get free tickets to almost everything that we present, which is a really, really great perk. In addition to choosing who's performing on our stages, I'm also in charge of figuring out what the most interesting way is for those artists to be interacting with our community, what we call engagement activities. So whether that is having a vocalist give a masterclass to our vocal students, or having an artist speak to an artist from Latin America, speak to our Latin American studies students, thinking of interesting and creative ways to bring the arts across campus and across the community. And we'll talk about mission a little bit later, but the mission of the College of Visual and Performing Arts is to make the arts an intrinsic part of our community, both on campus and in Northern Virginia. So our programming and the artists that we bring in is one of the signature ways that we do that. How's that? Yep.
Perfect. Thank you. So we'll talk now a little bit about the arts sector as an idea in American society. And I've got some statistics here, and Adrienne will post links to where this data comes from in a little bit. But I thought it might be interesting to look at the scope and size of what we call the arts industry in the United States of America. It's pretty big. It actually, statistically speaking, in terms of economic activity, this is not economic impact, that's a different and larger number, but economic activity generated by the 35 or so industries that fall under the rubric of the arts is $804 billion a year in the United States economy. That data was just released last year, and it is based on data from 2 years prior. So it's until COVID anyway, it was growing from that. It's just by way of comparison, it's larger than the agriculture sector. It's larger than the transportation sector. It's larger than the construction sector. And it's that may be counterintuitive, but when you think about everything that is included in what we call the arts, that includes things like architecture. Again, not building buildings, but designing them. It includes, of course, the film industry and the recording industry, which are enormous. It includes a lot of subsidiary specialties, work that feeds, almost literally, feeds the artistic production work. Museums are part of that total. So it casts quite a broad net. Again, 35 individual craft industries. It has roughly 5 million workers that are employed full-time in arts jobs. It has a $20 billion positive trade balance or trade surplus. We export more than we import, to the tune of about $20 billion. So we're talking about a really large component in American life. And I make that point a second point, which is more subtle, and that is that in the arts world, we typically divide that whole big pie into two other pies, one very large and one somewhat smaller, but still significant. And those two pies are what we call the commercial sector or the for-profit sector and the not-for-profit or non-profit sector. And in reality, there's a great deal of overlap in terms of practitioners. Many of us work part-time on commercial projects, part-time on nonprofit projects. The educational sector, which is a large element in this number, is also generally on the nonprofit side of that equation. But when you think about the difference between a Broadway show and a show at Arena Stage in downtown Washington, D.C., for example, or at the Shakespeare Theater, or at Signature Theater, or Woolly Mammoth, or any of the fine theaters that exist in Washington, D.C., at the Kennedy Center. Those are nonprofit institutions. So what's the difference? It's not that they don't bring in a whole bunch of money, because they do, they're part of that total. But the difference is really in terms of how you define the bottom line. So if I'm producing a show on Broadway, I'm using I as a metaphor here. If one is producing a show in a Broadway theater, Hamilton, let's say, why not? And by the way, if you haven't seen it, I absolutely encourage you to, it's on Disney Plus now, and it's worth just subscribing for that day and seeing that show because it's that good, I think. But let's say I'm the producer of Hamilton on Broadway. That production exists obviously to be a glorious work of theater, but also from the standpoint of the producers, it exists.
Adrienne, did you lose Rick there too? Do you want to pick up from there and start going?
Sure, yeah. So Rick was going over the difference between the commercial side of the industry and the nonprofit side of the industry. And so a show like Hamilton, all of the money that it makes, which it makes quite a lot, of course. First, it goes to offset the expenses that are incurred. And as you can imagine with a show like that, it's quite big. So there's a lot of expenses. And then whereas in the nonprofit model, usually anything that's left over, and there's not usually a lot, goes back into the programming, goes back into the organization to support future work. Whereas in on the commercial side of things, sometimes that's going back to the investors. So you hear a lot about Broadway investors that are giving the money, the upfront money, to get a show off the ground, and so that will go back to those individuals, as opposed to, say, going back into an organization that is then going to continue on and produce additional work. The other thing that I'll just add about the distinction between the commercial sector and the nonprofit sector is mission. Rick says he is back. Do you want to come back in, Rick? I'll continue talking about mission. How about that? And then we'll see you when you get back on. So a mission of a nonprofit organization. Bethany, should I keep going? Oh, you're muted.
We don't see him yet, so continue. You can just, you're
Okay.
doing fabulously. The show must go on.
Okay, great. It sure must. So with a nonprofit organization, the focus is really on your mission, and your mission is why your organization exists. So I mentioned earlier that the College of Visual and Performing Arts, our mission is to make the arts an intrinsic part of the lives of all of our community members. And every decision that we make about what we do, what our programming is to serve that mission. I will say, very roughly speaking, a commercial entity in general, their mission, although they might have subsequent artistic mission, is to recoup their expenses and to make money for those that invested in them. There's a lot of hybrid models out there. There's a lot of additional details that one could go into about that distinction, but I think it's important. I think it's important to know that. So we are a nonprofit organization as part of a university. Our university is a nonprofit organization, and so we are mission driven. That plays a big role when it comes to what happened when COVID hit, because the first thing that we had to ask ourselves was, what is our mission and how do we continue serving it? So with that, I see Rick. Can you? Okay, he's still.
Hi.
Oh, hello. We can hear you now.
You can hear me, but not see me.
Correct.
Well, you're doing great.
Well, hearing you is the most important part, though. So, Rick, I think I got us through the distinction between the commercial and nonprofit sector, and I was just leading up to Act 2, the catastrophe.
That's great. Can I say one more thing?
Absolutely.
And that. Oh wait, things are happening on my screen. Okay, hi. There's a role for government in the arts, obviously, as there's a role for government in encouraging all business, whether it's through the provision of highways and air traffic control, or whether it's through tax policy or whatever it might be. But in the arts, especially in the nonprofit sector, there's a very definite role for government support from local, state, and federal levels. And the United States has never been a country that has a tradition of supporting the arts at an extremely high level, although it is significant. By comparison, some countries in Europe and Asia have subsidies for their professional performing arts organizations anywhere from 60 to 80%, and in some cases even higher, of the total operating budget. So the obligation to pay high ticket prices is even further reduced than it is in the nonprofit model generally. But I'm making this point to show that there's an economic return on investment from arts activity in a given community, whether it's the economic development that happens when you produce arts, bringing people to the theater or to the museum, but they also go out to lunch or dinner, and they also may stay in a hotel, and they do all the things that make an economy work on the local level. They also pay taxes on much of that activity. And the economic impact of the arts in terms of tax revenue generating by both just the taxes that are paid on payroll taxes and everything else that the arts organizations themselves create, even though many of them are tax exempt, their economic activity still generates tax revenue. And then the tax revenue generated by the audiences that come in. This is just not my day for technology. I'm terribly sorry. I'm getting rid of that. Okay. The tax, I do apologize. The tax revenue that is generated far outweighs the tax allocations that are spent, and I have specific numbers on that as well. Roughly $5 billion is allocated to support the arts across all levels of the United States government, local, state, and federal. And by far the majority of that is local and state. The federal government is in the $200 million range from the National Endowment for the Arts. Against that $5 billion going out from the governmental purse, there is $27.5 billion coming in. This is not economic impact here. This is not an amorphous number. This is a real number. $27.5 billion coming in. So the return on investment, the ROI for taxpayer support of the arts in America is actually a very sizable 5-to-1 or so. So I think that's an important and less well-known part of the arts economy that kind of finishes Act 1. So, and again, I apologize. That was a FaceTime call coming in from a faculty member. So, these things happen. Act 2, the catastrophe. And okay, so here's COVID. I'm going to start this off, but I'm going to turn it over to Adrienne very quickly. It's mid-March. We are still having events in the concert hall in the Great Performance Series in early March, in mid-March. Spring break comes, and we know that things are starting to get a little bit dangerous out there in the world. And the very last performance that we had in the Center for the Arts actually was a rental performance. And it was the Shen Yun Company, which is a Chinese cultural program, dance theater program. We, after that, made the decision to shut down our performing arts centers for the rest of the spring season. And in that decision, we were actually a little bit ahead of the university, and we were a little bit ahead of many of our peer institutions in the region and around the country. And the calculation was this: safety first, the safety of the staff and the artists who might have come, and first and foremost, the safety of the audience, because when you're talking about having 1,500 people in close proximity, when you're talking about activities on stage that are quite vigorous, whether it's dancing or singing or playing instruments, the science of COVID was not so far advanced at that time that we knew exactly how it was transmitted, but we knew that having large numbers of people together was a great way to promote community transmission. So we made the very hard decision right around March 12th or 13th that would be the end of the spring season. So everything through the end of May. And in coordination with George Mason, with the leadership of the university, we were able to make that call. But that then introduced a whole other set of variables, which I'm going to turn it over to Adrienne to flesh out, having to do with two major concerns. Our own budget, because we lost all ticket revenue instantly, and our ability to support the artistic sector, because artists and touring companies often operate on a very narrow margin in terms of their own financial health. And the catastrophic cancellation of every live performance across the country was hitting this sector very, very hard. So we kicked into high gear and tried to figure out some ways of coping with that. And Adrienne was instrumental in that process.
Sure. So just to give everyone an idea of the timeline, normally it takes about 2 years to put together what we call a season. So the series of artists that we are bringing in for us, it's September through May for performances. And, you know, so when all of this started happening in February and March, artists had these tours booked for many months, if not years, very carefully planned tours. And as Rick mentioned, they're all the margin is usually very small. And if one city on a tour falls out of that tour because of whatever reason, it is crippling to an artist if that revenue has to be taken away. So when we started to hear that there were going to be that this virus was becoming quite an issue, you know, I reached out to all of the artists at both of our venues, which I think we had about between 30 and 40 artists who of varying kind of levels and national renown that were scheduled to come. And everyone was kind of letting everyone else, giving everyone updates. You know, I was asking artists, are you healthy? Has anyone big diagnosed? Are other cities canceling on you? Do you think you still can potentially come here? I was giving them updates on our status at the university. So, you know, in the beginning, we were on a close watch, but, you know, we hadn't made the decision yet to close down. And kind of as those conversations progressed, I wanted the artists to have as much of a heads up as I could that we were potentially going to have to cancel. And I'll just say that, you know, the arts world is not a big world. And so many of the artists that we present, we have, you know, relationships that go back many years. Or if the artist is new to us, the agent that is representing them, we perhaps have worked with for a long time. So these are individuals that are our friends, they're our family. Rick mentioned the artistic ecosystem, and that really, you know, it is a great metaphor because you have artists and they're supported by presenters that's us, who are supported by the audience members. And without, one of those three members of the ecosystem, it kind of collapses. So, when we realized that that we were going to have to cancel all of our performances, we took a hard look at who we serve. Again, going back to that mission, we knew that we needed to continue somehow to serve our patrons off campus that come and attend performances. We knew that we needed to serve our student body, both students who enjoy the arts and also students who participate in the arts. We had many students that were not going to be able to have their performances as part of their classes, that had been working, in some cases all year to have a culminating event, and that weren't going to have that anymore. And we knew that we had to really support the artists. As Rick mentioned, artists in March lost all of their revenue for the most part, and had no idea when they were going to be able to tour again. At that point, we thought maybe things would be back open in the summer. Of course, that has not happened. So they really did, they lost all financial stability for the foreseeable future. Most artists are independent contractors and don't have steady incomes, don't have health insurance. So we knew that we needed to connect all of these different communities. And so the way that we did that was through an online platform that we created in about 2 weeks, I think, called Mason Arts at Home. And essentially this presented live stream performances from artists' homes. It presented conversations between artists that were potentially maybe supposed to be a part of our season that couldn't make it, or artists that are coming up next season that we wanted to introduce our audiences to. It also presented live stream performances of some of our student work. And also we launched an alumni commissioning project where we gave alums stipends and commissioning funds to create work specifically for the digital realm. So we learned an incredible amount. This program ran for 6 weeks. I can't remember the exact number, but I think we were at the point where we had almost an event 5 times a week. So we became very adept at how to live stream, what content worked in a digital format and what content maybe wasn't as successful. And, I'm sure many of you saw that there was just a complete onslaught of free content online by artists in those weeks after COVID. There was an incredible generosity from the artistic community. Everyone was performing for free, and we can kind of talk about that a little bit later. But one of the things we learned was market saturation, that more is not always better. And so as we look to the fall, we're definitely taking that into consideration as we continue Mason Arts at Home. But I want to stop there because I want to let Rick chime back in if you want to about what has happened over the summer, or anything that I missed about the spring.
Yeah, no, that's a good story because what I'd like to convey and just underline is the sense of constant crisis management that really every sector of American life and worldwide was going through, no matter what your industry, no matter what your job. But to try to think of it in terms of staying on mission, to try to think of it of how can we continue to do the thing that the world expects us to do. And I think there's a silver lining, one at least, and we might come to some, and that is that as people have been quarantined, as people have been homebound, as people have had their lives disrupted, many millions of people in America, probably billions around the world, have turned to the arts as the thing that has gotten them through. And we are seeing in streaming services, we're seeing in digital content providers, large and small, and including ourselves, a tremendous hunger for the values that the arts convey. And some of those values are empathy. Some of those values are living in the shoes of someone else's life and imagining your way into a world that is not your own. That's a tremendously important gift that literature and the arts give to the world. And I think many, many things that, as Adrienne was saying, that we've experimented with, what's the best way to deliver that? What's the best way to allow that experience to come through the small screen or the very small screen? And we're learning about that constantly. But we know statistically that viewership of streaming services is way up. And there's more variety of artistic content available. Some for free initially. Practically everything was for free. Now people are trying to figure out a way to have a modest ticket price, or if you will, or entry fee, because what everybody I think needs to realize, or does realize, is that this will not free. These are professional people whose job it is in the world to make this work. And just like you wouldn't call the plumber and say, hey, can you come fix my sink for free? At least maybe not more than once. Artists are professionals in their own right, and in order to live and do their work, we need to figure out how to pay them. We were very creative with Mason Arts at Home to try to leverage our scarce resources in such a way that it would allow artists to keep creating. The alumni commissions are wonderful. You'll see, I see Bethany posted a link to the Mason Arts at Home site. You can go in there, and there's a YouTube link on that link, and you can go in and look at the YouTube channel that we've created and see brand new work that was created just for this moment by some of our recent graduates. So staying on mission, staying true to the reason that people want art in the first place is so important in this time of dissociation and fragmentation societally. And we'll get into some more social themes here in just a little bit, because the world changed yet again in late May and early June with the protests and the calls for racial justice and so on. And that's a whole other theme, but it actually relates to COVID in a weird way, because everything's changing and everything is feeling like it has to change. And that's a really exciting time, actually, to be in the arts, to be in higher education. One of the readings that we posted for this is an essay by a playwright who actually used to teach close by here at Annandale, a young playwright, an emerging playwright, as she describes herself. And she talks about, yes, there's been a disruption, but what are we going to do when we get back? Are we going to just try to recreate the same thing that we had? Some of us weren't so happy with the same thing that we had. Some of us were feeling excluded from that thing that we had. Others of us felt like the same thing that we had was the same thing that we've always had. And how interesting is that? And so the opportunity that has been, some might say imposed on us, some might say offered to us by these twin pressing issues, is really an opportunity for introspection and self-examination, but also an opportunity to think strategically ahead into the future. When we do restart these theaters, when we do reopen these companies, when we do put these orchestras back on stage, what should they look like? What should they be performing? How should they be engaging with their communities? So there's an element of sort of philosophical energy around this moment too that is really quite exciting. So one of the, I think I just took us into Act 3 accidentally, which is imagining a new future for the performing arts. We are facing, as a sector now, I'm not talking again specifically about George Mason only, we are facing as a sector possibility that some significant percentage of arts institutions will not reopen at all. It's reckless to speculate on the number, but I'm going to do it anyway. I think anywhere between a quarter and a third of arts institutions. What's an arts institution? A museum, a gallery, a dance company, a theater company, an opera company, an orchestra, a band, whatever. Talking about the particularly the nonprofit sector here. About a quarter to a third of those institutions probably won't come back, or won't come back in anything recognizable as what they were. So that's hard. That's hard to contemplate. That means a lot of people out of work. That means a lot of communities not served by an art form that they had grown used to. At the same time, it creates a mammoth opening for innovation. And one of the things that I think all of us in whatever sector, all of us need to think about is moments for innovation are important to grab and run with. But we all have to be careful not to make the same mistakes that we made the last time there was a moment for innovation. And I'll tell you one thing, I'm a little older than Adrienne. I won't say exactly, but I am old enough to have worked in the nonprofit American theater for, not as one of the founders by any means, I'm way too young for that. I worked for some of the founders of the regional theater movement that began their work in the 50s and 60s. And it was a moment, it was a time of incredible energy, incredible creativity, of setting up these theaters and orchestras around the country, getting out of New York, Chicago, and LA, getting into places all around the country. Any sizable city would have a theater company, an orchestra, maybe if they're really lucky, an opera company and a dance company. This was revolutionary, but it was done, much of it was done on the backs of people who were radically underpaid, who were radically overtaxed in terms of what they were asked to do. And there was a heavy burnout factor in this field for decades. So are we going to recreate that wheel? Are we going to say that the field is clear now for a bunch of, let's say, young innovators? Great. We want that to happen. But are we going to have the same cycle of innovation burnout happen all over again? So that's just sort of one aspect of this, that yes, seize the opportunity, but don't just recreate what we did in the 60s and 70s and 80s when we had the opportunity again. So that was a bit of a tangent, but Adrienne, I'd like to turn it back to you and maybe bring us back to some of the things that we're planning and your perspective on the national field of presenting, because if there's going to be a recovery, I think the presenters are going to lead it.
Sure. So, I'll just reiterate the fact that, we find ourselves in a time of reinvention and innovation. And that is, I've been trying to embrace that uncertainty. When we knew that this summer that we were going to decide not to have in-person performances in our theaters, this fall, that was a huge moment for us as an organization. We're celebrating our 30th anniversary this fall, and that has never happened. And so we have, and we are continuing to completely reimagine what a performing arts season looks like. And I remember sending an email to Rick and to my colleagues saying, all right, you're going to have to give me a month or 6 weeks to try to figure this out, because, we're not working with the same playbook anymore. Artists have been, we've all been very comfortable in in a theatrical space, having that fourth wall of, which I can let Rick explain the fourth wall concept, but these theatrical conventions, the space that we're used to, the lighting, the orchestra pit, this is how we're used to creating work for the most part in traditional performing arts, I'll say. And that has been completely taken away from us because we can't be in spaces with audiences anymore. And so artists needed a little bit of time, and they will need a lot of time to truly figure out how they're going to react. But I've been really inspired by artists that have risen to the occasion, that are interested in engaging in this digital model or reimagining how the touring landscape can work and should work. And, as we look to the fall, we are looking at a variety of different ideas, which we're going to announce next month, hopefully. But a combination of potentially outdoor, socially distanced concerts, which we've actually never done before at the Center for the Arts. We're looking at live streaming performances without audiences in our own spaces. We are looking at collaborating with fellow presenters across the nation that are presenting work that we might not be able to have in our space, but we can work with them to present something digitally. I mean, I think that that's one of the things that has been really another silver lining that's come of all of this is people have had to collaborate, because when COVID hit, it hit people differently and people had different resources left over. Some people had space, some people had money, some people had staff members that they didn't have to let go. And I've really seen the sector kind of come together and say, okay, you have that, you have that, you have that, let's make a show happen somehow. You see artists that are presenting drive-through concerts. So you've got, you know, artists kind of spaced out in a parking lot and someone drives through the parking lot. I mean, there's incredible work happening in the augmented reality and the virtual reality world. So it's been pretty incredible. And, you know, we sit in this uncertainty at any point. You know, right now we're planning to have outdoor concerts, and they would have maybe 250 people that would attend. At any point, the governor could say to us, no, we're going back to phase 2. It has to be 50, you know, max of 50 people that can attend, and we'll have to completely, you know, rethink that idea. So we know that the next 6 months, the next year, we cannot just rest on our laurels. And I think that's actually a good exercise for many of us.
Let me jump in.
Oh yeah.
A quick thing about accessibility and numbers and things, because one of the moments of reinvention that I think is upon us is that we realize that some of our digital content, and I'm speaking capital O, ours and the industries, has reached a much broader audience than our live performances ever did. And this is nothing against live performance, which I live for, both as a creator and as a consumer. But the question of whatever economic or social disincentives are in place in our culture that doesn't allow people to feel comfortable or to be able to afford to go to the theater. I know a lot of people, I'll use Hamilton again, and that's from the commercial sector, but I mean, I paid, and I'm gonna just say it, I paid $199 for one ticket. So I actually paid almost $400 for 2 tickets to see Hamilton at the Kennedy Center when it came to town. And that's crazy, right? I think that's crazy. I know, I'm glad I did because I loved it. But I also know that now for $7.99 or whatever it costs to log on to Disney Plus for a week, you can see, yeah, it's on TV, but it's a great show. And you're getting the content, and you can even get subtitles so you can, you know, get all the lyrics the first time, which are amazing. And I think there are real profound questions about access to the arts that this digital moment is forcing us to embrace and confront. And I'm just kind of excited about how when we do return to a live performance in the ways that Adrienne was describing, we might also think about how to make sure that some of our work at least is available to a broader audience for at their own convenience on the clock or at their own affordability point.
Yeah, I mean, I think the conversation between presenter and agent or presenter and artist has completely changed, because we now understand that the digital realm is one that we have had to embrace and that will be with us forever. And the possibilities there are really, really interesting and really inspiring. And I think, you know, I mentioned the augmented reality and virtual reality work that's happening. I mean, that is here to stay, and that is pushing the bounds of the performing arts in really creative, wonderful ways. So, you know, I know that it will remain a part of what we do. It may not be the focus of what we do once we can return to be in person together. But it will continue to be a part of our engagement strategy and how we reach audiences. Are we getting cut off?
Bethany made a reappearance, which is our subtle cue that we should wrap it up and begin to start taking questions.
You just have you have, I'm nodding along, and clearly our students are nodding along. They have a ton of questions
Okay.
that I would love to be able to get to, because they're great questions.
Okay. Can I want to speak really quickly to the issue of racial inequality and just talk a little bit about that in the performing arts. I would say the kind of theme of this summer, both in terms of what has happened post-COVID, or I guess we're still in COVID, but post all of the original cancellations that happened because of COVID, and also with the conversations around race, is there's been a lot of questions around power in the performing arts, and who holds the power, and how, and is that fair, and should it continue to exist in the same way? And I think that the answer around the field is a resounding no. And what I'm talking about is who is in leadership positions, who make up the boards of arts organizations, who are deciding what artists are on the stage. And so this is something that, that we are thinking about and talking about a lot, and we're starting to look and in CVPA at very concrete ways that we can share that power and make ours a more equitable institution. And I know that President Washington released a really wonderful statement with some actionable items today. So I just wanted to put that out there to say that, as Rick mentioned, these two kind of crises that have come together, the world feels a little bit on fire right now. But from that ash, I think will rise a more equitable performing arts industry, and which is something that I look forward to helping to shepherd, along in the future.
And just to put one final historical point on that excellent insight, if you look at the history of 20th century American arts, some of the greatest work across disciplines was done in the mid to late 30s and in the mid to late 60s and early 70s. And those were times of comparable ferment. In some cases, very comparable. In other cases, just comparable in terms of scale. And artists do tend to be canaries in the, it's the old metaphor, right? The miner going down the coal mine with the canary, and if the canary starts to pass out, you turn around and leave the mine, or you should. There's an element of artists being attuned to social currents and being inspired by them. And it's just very interesting to contemplate what's going to come out of all of that, both on the creative production side and, as Adrienne was alluding to, on the institutional structural side, because the structure ultimately determines what gets put on stage, and that's very much under question right now. Speaking of questions.
Excellent. Part of not having my camera on was not knowing how much I was nodding along with all of the things you've been talking about. One thing I wanted to point out is in the Love Fest for Hamilton, which I think is not only one of the most brilliant, sort of pieces of theater I've seen in terms of the complexity of writing. I learned something new, and I must have heard it 100 times so far. And my tickets, Rick, that I paid that much for were canceled because of the, yes. So I have watched it with my family on Disney Plus.
It's pretty good.
It's pretty good, Leslie Odom Jr.
Yeah.
There's some connection with Leslie Odom.
Thank you so much for bringing that up. I wrote it down on my notes here. Leslie Odom Jr., who played Aaron Burr in the original cast of Hamilton, will be performing at the Hylton Performing Arts Center in Manassas on May 2nd, 2021. Fingers crossed. So we're very, very, very excited about that.
He's booked, he's contracted. The fingers are for COVID, right? That we're back in operation now, but we've got him. Yay, Adrienne, that was good work. Thank you, Bethany, for that segue.
I thought I'm just angling for a ticket myself. So, as we've been thinking about this, I've also been thinking about the fact that I'm from Richmond, and watching not only performing arts, but the way they've turned the bases of the statues on Monument Avenue into physical art has been amazing. And I think about that as almost a metaphor for the way we're transforming the arts in general, and using all of these moments and letting ownership take place in all kinds of interesting ways. So